Hello everyone. This video is a little late in the making. I went to Vietnam beginning of February, so about 7 months ago, and stayed there for 3 whole months before continuing on to Europe and then coming back to the States and traveling around the States. And it's been a crazy ride, but that also means that I wanted to talk about my 3 month experience in Vietnam a while ago, and I haven't gotten around to it until now. So here I am, and I'd love to share with you some of the things about my trip and my experience learning Vietnamese, which I can only speak a little bit of now. I've already forgotten a lot, unfortunately, and about some of the things I've learned about language learning during that time. So, just to catch everybody up, I went, my wife and I went to Vietnam at the beginning of February, partially because it was a place we just wanted to explore, but also partially because we had had an agreement that I wouldn't learn any languages from Southeast Asia until I had already gone there, because I had already, in the traveling that I had done and living abroad that I had done up to that point, I had only been to places where I already spoke some of the language before I got to that place. And Southeast Asia, on the other hand, I hadn't studied any of it. So I'd never learned what it was like, had the experience that other people had had of being completely lost in another country, in another culture, in another language, just having no idea what's going on. So, as per our agreement, I did not pick up a book on Vietnamese. I already knew how to say hello and how to say thank you, but in both cases it was very poor, and people didn't always understand me, so I didn't really know how to say it. And when we arrived in Ho Chi Minh City, I had a full day before I even went to a bookstore and picked up a language book. And then over the course of those 3 months, I learned what at the time was passable beginning Vietnamese. I would say that I was in a pretty solid A2 level for those of you that use the European system. That was after 3 months, and then at the end of those 3 months, I went to Europe and promptly begun forgetting a lot of the Vietnamese that I had learned. So unfortunately, right now I can talk some, but I've forgotten a lot, and I was much more conversant. So I hope that it comes back to me. I'd like to continue speaking the language. I just haven't used it. So what was it like being a polyglot, being a seasoned language learner, to go to a country and learn from the moment I got there? A lot of people really love the idea of traveling somewhere and learning a language while they travel. And obviously, there's the benefit when you arrive somewhere of being immersed and going, all right, now I have to learn it. But truth be told, it wasn't really the best decision, because I mean it was good for me for a lot of reasons to have that experience, but I wouldn't choose to do it again. I would definitely choose from here on out to learn some of the language before I go to a country, at least a good grasp of some basic conversational things. Not because of getting lost, not because of being able or unable to purchase things that I needed, but because of the richness of the culture that you miss out on if you don't speak the language. Because of the warmth and inviting friendliness of people when you speak to them in their language, which you don't get to have if you're just speaking, or at least not as much of, if you're just speaking in English or whatever your native tongue is. So we went to Vietnam. We flew into the south in Ho Chi Minh City, flew up to Hanoi, and stayed in Hanoi for a month, and then began to slowly travel down towards the center and back to Ho Chi Minh City, and we left from Ho Chi Minh City. And the first couple weeks in Hanoi, I had a difficult time communicating. I actually discovered that despite speaking already Mandarin, which is a tonal language, and having a lot of experience with phonetics, I had a lot of difficulties with pronouncing Vietnamese correctly. And it took me a while to get an okay accent, and I still make plenty of mistakes. But one thing that was really important and really magical for me was finding that after about 2 weeks, I started to be able to say enough Vietnamese that people understood I was studying it and wasn't just some tourist in passing that had just learned how to order food. They figured out that I actually had an interest in the language. And so I started to have conversations with people that really made them excited, though most of the conversations still reverted to English or French, depending on the individual. It made them excited that I cared about their culture, that I cared about their language, and I wanted to know more about it. And as soon as that happened, people went from being a kind of tourist to native interaction where they're a bit standoffish and are trying to sell you things to opening up, talking to me about the place, talking to me about where they're from and what the real experience in Vietnam is like. And the entire trip opened up from that. The entire um, every day I had a better and more interesting interaction because of that. And we all love to learn languages for a lot of different reasons. That can be for the people, it can be for history or for music and film, and it can be for culture. It can just be for the language itself. For a lot of us, it's all of those things. But what I really discovered was it is more worth it to be able to connect with people as soon as you can. And so now that I've done this, I intend to always learn as much as I can of a language before going, or at least a reasonable amount before going to a location. Now, that being said, while I was in Vietnam, being there definitely made it easier. I live in Seattle, where there are a lot of Vietnamese speakers, but I don't actually see very many of them. I need to make an effort to go out and interact with them. But even then, there are a lot of reasons why some of them may appreciate me speaking Vietnamese with them, and some of them would prefer that I speak English with them just because this is an English-speaking country, and many of them are here as immigrants, and it can seem rude if I speak Vietnamese with them. So it's a very different thing to be in the country with people who are interested in speaking the language. And it's hard to practice here comparatively, whereas, say, French or Spanish or German, there are a lot of, not only are there people who speak it natively that live here, but there are also people who are studying it in school who will interact with you just because they're passionate about the language. And that makes learning Vietnamese a very different experience in general, and sometimes more difficult one. Now, I said, though, that it was a good thing for me to go to Vietnam and to see what it was like starting out not speaking the language. And it was good for a lot of reasons. One main reason is the more we polyglots study languages and learn that even though it's a difficult thing to learn language, everybody else sees us and goes, well, you speak these languages, you must be really gifted at it, you must just have some language gene, as some people have talked about it, or something that makes it really easy for you to learn languages. And we forget that it's not only is it the part where that we are always talking about, where we go, but we actually put a lot of time into this process of learning languages. I'm always telling people, well, when you're off doing your hobbies, my hobby is, one of my big hobbies is learning languages. That's what I do. I wake up in the morning and I study languages for an hour before I do the rest of my day. I find my free time and I study languages because I enjoy it. Whereas for me, because I found that I was in this country where there were some English speakers, there were a lot of things I could do without Vietnamese, and I was finding it difficult to actually speak the language sometimes, I could really relate to individuals who go to a country and say to themselves, yeah, while I'm there, I'm going to try and speak the language, and then go, wow, this is difficult I don't think I want to do it. I'm going to put the brakes on speaking this language and I'm just going to do English. And I feel bad about it, but that's what I'm going to do. It really allowed me to empathize with that experience and recognize how much motivation is the key and how you have to have real intrinsic motivation because otherwise you burn out. So with all the talk we have about how hard a language is or isn't and how important it is that you're consistent, that consistency, it's true you need that, but you need motivation to be consistent. And it was a lot easier for me to empathize with other other people who are not actually motivated to learn languages and understand why it is that a lot of people don't end up learning those languages. The other thing that I got to experience by being in Vietnam that I didn't have, for example, when I lived in France, was when I lived in France, I already spoke French. I had already been studying it for a long time, and I was a student at the university. So even though there were things I still had to learn, and I still have things to learn in French, I could already have a conversation. I could already do a lot of things I needed to do. In Vietnam, I was starting from scratch. So everything that I needed to do, that I needed to communicate about, I had to learn how to communicate about. And that meant that even with the books that I had, the books that I found, some of which were really not very good, the materials for Vietnamese are much lower quality than for a lot of other languages, probably because of the fact that there aren't very many people who study it from the English-speaking world or French-speaking world. But even with the materials that I had to create my own lessons based on what I was going to do. If I went to a temple ahead of time, I really had to spend my own time coming up with what kind of questions I needed to ask or talk about, or what I would want to understand if I read it on a sign, and so on and so forth, so that I could really talk about that temple. If I went to an art store or an area with a lot of art, I wanted to be able to do that. If I was going to take a bus somewhere, I needed to be able to do that. And I had to constantly look at what I was planning on doing or what I wanted to do or what I needed to do, and then create my own material from phrase books, from my lesson books, and create my own material that I would then learn. I used Anki for it, which was really helpful. I would learn, I would review, I would practice with in a mirror or by myself or whatnot, until I ended up getting to use it. And we talk a lot about how, you know, you have to use the language or you're going to forget it. You have to have relevance. And I talk about that, I blog about that. You need to have relevance for a language for you to learn it and for you to remember it. And if you don't have that relevance, it's going to be that much harder. You're not going to remember the material because you know it's not important to you. You're not going to learn the material because you have to put that much more effort into just learning something that doesn't seem valuable. But instead, you flip it on its end. Instead of learning the material and hoping that you find something that's relevant for it, you take what's relevant in your life and you learn the material that will allow you to do that. It's the same thing we can do at home. I'm going to cook something. I'm going to cook an Italian dish. Maybe I look up the ingredients in the recipe in Italian and I talk about my what I'm cooking in Italian. And then with myself, while I'm cooking, I narrate myself cooking in Italian and I read the recipe in Italian, and it becomes necessary, it becomes vital, and I use it. Well, when you're abroad, it's a lot easier to find that context. But if you really want to be effective, it's best to plan ahead, to go, I'm going to need this in 2 days. So I'm going to learn this right now and start practicing so that I can use it in 2 days. So that was a real benefit for me being in Vietnam and getting to experience something that I had already said was important outside of a country, and find out how much more valuable it was for me as a language learner to experience that abroad, having to learn things before I use them, and to also learn just through practice of doing that over the course of those 3 months, how to be better at taking that material and teaching it to myself, finding the most relevant parts, determining am I going to need these words? No, I don't learn them right now. This is what I'm going to need so that I can really work with what's ahead of me. Um, I mean, that's the bulk of what my experience was in Vietnam. I really wanted to share that. It was a wonderful place. It is a wonderful place. I miss it. I miss the food. I miss the people. Contrary to most people's uh, opinions, I actually really loved Hanoi in the north more than my time in the south. The south was great. Everything's wonderful there. Everything's wonderful in the central area. But I made some good friendships in Hanoi, and I really loved the food in Hanoi. So the north really connected to me, and I hope I have the opportunity to go back there soon. Um, though who knows? And right now, like I said, my Vietnamese is suffering. It's not very good, and I need to put in some more practice, and especially some speaking practice. So while I'm here in Seattle for the next few weeks, I will make a point of going to some of the Vietnamese areas and communicating with people. Um, in the meantime, I guess it's just going to be books because I don't have a whole lot of Vietnamese film or literature that I can really break into because I'm not quite at that level. Um, and that's that. Anyway, I hope that this was helpful for anybody else. And I'm got a couple more videos on the way. I've been a little bit slow. I'm sorry for the quality of this video. I have a new computer and the webcam is not very good quality, particularly with light coming from the window washing out my face. Um, but this is what I'll be using for a little while, so you'll have some lower quality videos for a little bit. I have another video I'd like to do pretty soon about my time at the Gathering, Polyglot Gathering in 2016, which was amazing and was in May, so that is also a very overdue video, but there's a lot I'd like to share about how wonderful an experience that was and all the great people that I met there. So, you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope that your language learning projects are going well. All right, cảm ơn.